It's just like an approach, like the right tool for the shop.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of React Native Radio. Today on our show we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey everyone.
Kevin Old.
Hello.
And I'm Nader Dabbit. Today our special guests are Jesse Sessler and Bruno Barbieri from Delivery.com. Bruno and Jesse, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves and kind of give us a background of how you got into programming and what brought you into React Native before we kind of get on the topic?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Jesse. So I've been working at Delivery.com for a little over a year. I started working on our Angular website for the first 6 months or so. And after those 6 months, the company had just started building a new iOS native team to kind of rebuild our iOS app from the ground up. And I was asked to join the team. So I spent a little bit of time learning Swift and Objective-C, and I've been on that team ever since. And I started working with React Native around October or so. Is when we decided to start playing with it. Yeah, I think Bruno maybe will get into a little bit more of the story of how we integrated it.
Sure. Well, yeah, about me, I am from Uruguay, a small country with a famous soccer team. So I work as a lead mobile engineer at Delivery.com. I've been there for almost like 2 years. About my background, I started doing like web development like 12 years ago or so. It was like mostly backend development, and then I ended up working as a CTO of a couple of startups. And then I went like all in with front-end development, and now I'm making apps. So yeah, I started with React Native almost at the same time as Jesse. So we started playing like a little bit with Android, and then we switched to iOS. So there's like a big story that happened by that time.
Yeah, so does your company, I guess, already have like a native app, iOS and Android? And then if so, like how big is the engineering team for those two teams, I guess? Sure.
Yeah, about like the what we had before and what we had now, we used to have like a phone app, like a Cordova app, wrapped app for Android and iOS. The Android one is still the same. We didn't have time enough to deal with it. But for iOS, yeah, we have this app for like the last, year and a half or so. Yeah, then we decided to go fully native. And, after we were almost done with that app, we look at React Native, and it was like, we might take a look to that thing. So that's pretty much like the situation about what we had before. Like we came from this hybrid background that, it was okay for just to have something decent in the market. But at some point we realized that we need to go fully native.
Yeah. So like what kind of functionality does, or I guess tell me what does Delivery.com like deliver or offer on the app itself?
Sure. So Delivery.com, the company, it's an e-commerce platform. And we basically allow users to order online, pick up or delivery from their favorite restaurants, grocery stores, liquor stores, and dry cleaners as well.
Okay, cool. So like what markets are you in right now?
So we have a large presence in New York, also Chicago, Boston, LA, and San Francisco, and also Washington, D.C.
Okay, yeah, nice. I know I had heard of it. I haven't really used it. I'm assuming I'm in Mississippi. You guys probably don't have anything going on here right now. Are you guys planning on kind of branching out into smaller areas, or what's the plan right now for like the future of you guys' company?
I don't think we can speak to that too much. It's more on the business development side of things. We kind of just more focused on the technology, but I know we're always looking to expand. So.
Yeah, I've seen your advertisements all over Chicago.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's one of the places where we are, start to moving, to be more active.
Yeah, absolutely. I see ads my entire commute, so they're all over the place. I can't wait to try the service.
Oh, great.
I may have missed this, but did you guys mention how many engineers you have, both Android and iOS?
No. So about that, since we have still this, Android wrapped app, we don't have an Android team. Like just web developers we're taking care of because it's like a Angular. It's like a version of the website into a wrapped Cordova app. So it's just Angular JS. And for iOS, we are currently 5 people.
Okay, cool. So when you first started integrating React Native, what did the other iOS developers think? Were they like on board, or were they a little distraught that you guys are kind of trying to bring JavaScript into their territory? Did you guys have any issues with that?
Yeah, sure. So it was some controversy because like 40% of the team had like previous JavaScript experience. So, and we just, we start playing with React Native just a little bit after we released, 6 months of work and an iOS app from scratch. So like people was like, wait, what is this? Are we going to rebuild this entire app and just waste all the stuff we did? And, but, we had meetings to talk about that. And, everyone understand that it's like just another tool, which is very powerful. And, it's like that we are not going full React Native, or we're just going to do all Swift. It's just like an approach, like the right tool for the shop.
Yeah, cool. That's good to hear. I know sometimes that may be a little tougher for companies or people to try something new, but I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. That's kind of like one thing that we realized is like, this is like a really, really good thing. And, but, not all the companies or all the people that have their own apps can afford to reveal an entire thing, That doesn't mean that they can't try it, like your app keeps evolving, you keep, adding or changing stuff, and you can use React Native in the middle, and it plays pretty well. That's what we learned from this experience.
Do you think there would ever be a chance in the future where the next big feature that you build, you end up building in React Native over Swift?
Yeah, totally. That's actually the things that we are kind of discussing. It's just like the approach is pretty much like, okay, what do we have done in the native side to complete or add this new feature? If we have more stuff on the native side, it just makes sense to do it native. But, if something that we are going to start from scratch, we know we can do it way faster using React Native. We also take into consideration the limitations, right? So if you have to touch very low level stuff or APIs and you have to reach 50 different things, it might not make sense to use React Native. But taking those considerations apart, I think, the answer is yeah, definitely.
I was just going to say what was especially nice for, our first kind of foray into React Native was that when we, were really powering through to build the native app in the first place in Objective-C and Swift, there were a couple pages that in kind of the app flow where it just didn't make sense to spend a lot of time on it. And we ended up going with web views and, kind of wrapping the website and using those as certain views in our app. So once the app launched, one of our first priorities was to make those views native now that we could, breathe a little bit and have a little bit more time. And since those were web views, we kind of had this baseline where we knew if we had rebuilt these views in React Native, we would get a much better feel, much better performance. And the result turned out even better than we thought it would. So,
oh, that's awesome. When it comes to data, do you have to handle data separately, or can you share data from iOS and React Native and vice versa?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's actually something that when we were getting started, we had a lot of discussions and back and forth about, and still talking about it, actually. So we came up with this approach where we wanted to pass the minimum amount of information necessary from native into JavaScript, into the root of the app, and then try to do everything from there if possible. So what we ended up doing, for example, one of our pages is kind of a merchant info page. You want to know more about a restaurant that you're potentially ordering from, you go to this merchant info page. There's information about their hours and reviews and everything like that. So in order to render that page, all we needed, rather than pass all of the data, the individual data on that merchant, we would just pass the ID. And we built all of the layers in JavaScript to, make the API call, create a merchant model, and do all the rendering in JavaScript. So we could have went the other way and passed, all of this information through the RCT root view in, initial properties, let's say. But we decided to go with this first approach, and so far it's worked out really well, particularly because at the same time that we started experimenting with React Native, our Angular team started working with React. So because we're doing a lot more of the work in, JavaScript for these new views than in native code, we can share code. We can, share a lot of what we learn. And the ultimate goal is, write once and have it work in both places. So we're working towards that.
Yeah, I'd like to take a step back and kind of get an overall general idea. Like, what does it take to actually take an entire view or component that you already have written in native, and kind of how does the process start to implement it in React Native? And kind of how did you guys go about doing that? Did you go about the documentation, and how thorough was the documentation as far as your individual use case, and kind of any pitfalls and things like that you did run into there?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first thing is that, we didn't necessarily take views that we had already built in native and replace them with React Native views. We took views that were maybe web views or things that we hadn't even built yet and built those in React Native. And in terms of how we did that, we experimented a little before we got started. So, we had to learn Flexbox for styling and just kind of stick with the documentation as much as possible. There is a great piece in the documentation now called Communicating Between Native and React Native. But at the time that we were writing this, we actually didn't have that. That wasn't on the website. So we hit a few pain points along the way. The passing of data, for example, was something that it might have been documented, but we couldn't find this initial properties argument that is basically the whole key to moving from your native code into your React Native code and how you pass all that data in the first place. So we looked at, any examples that were out there, went into the examples in the source code. And then as we were developing, React Native's obviously still developing. So the documentation gets better, every week, every 2 weeks as people contribute more. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of a process, we kind of just had a lot of learnings as we went. We looked at examples, stayed on Discord and chat rooms and talked to as many people as possible. Yeah, in the end, we found everything that we need. Not necessarily as straightforward as we would have liked, obviously, but it turned out really well. So,
yeah, more on the technical side of that. I can explain it pretty quickly. We have like a view controller with what we call like React view controller. And inside of it, we have this React view, which is kind of like, let's call it like an iframe if we think of like web development. So basically, we can plug that view in on any single, let's say, screen of our current native iOS app. And that's where we are saying, okay, this part is going to be React Native. And we just like pass properties to like data, like Jesse said, like IDs or let's say the out token or stuff like that we need to make API calls or data to render. And then we grab that with the navigator and we just render like the component for the page that we want to show or the view that we want to show on React Native. That's pretty much how it works.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So how exactly do you communicate outside of that component with the rest of the app?
Sure. For that, like we have like ways of like exposing. We basically breach native stuff that we want to be able to call from JavaScript. One example of that is like the loader. Like our React views are not full screen because we are keeping the context of the app. For example, we get like the navbar rendering as a native component, but the content of that view is might be React Native. So, but we needed to the ability to call like a loader that was full screen, And that's when we start like exposing native stuff into JavaScript, which, today that's pretty good documented. And I don't know, I guess that's an example of like stuff we did, like bridging. The other way of going back to the native code is like sending notifications, which is basically bridging to our own classes, and then is catching that call on native code and trigger a real notification in iOS. I think Jesse, you did that, so you might want to explain a little more.
Yeah, so we use our CT export module a lot. Anytime we had some logic that was ready to go on the native side, and we didn't want to have to rebuild it or rewrite it on the JavaScript side. For example, like any logging or analytics or, I don't know, kind of app-centric business logic, we would use notifications and just namespace them as React specific so that we wouldn't have collisions with any other developers that could potentially be working with notifications. One important thing that we learned pretty early on was that when you post notifications, so if you export a method to React Native that's posting a notification in your app, you have to make sure you do so on the main thread. Otherwise, you could kind of run into some weird behavior that's kind of inexplicable, the multi-threaded kind of bugs that you run into. But as long as you make sure that you keep things on the main thread, it can flow pretty smoothly. One other thing that we ended up having to bridge, which was a pretty fun project, was we had a custom keyboard, a text input with an input accessory view. It's kind of like a keyboard with a bar on top, that's has our company's colors on it. It has a done button and a cancel button, just this little custom keyboard that we had. And it was pretty difficult to replicate that in JavaScript with a React Native text input at the time. I think since then they might have added the input accessory view as a prop, but I'm not sure about that. So that was our first kind of foray into not exporting a module, but exporting an actual UI view. So that's been pretty well documented since we started. But at the time, we actually kind of went into React source code, and that was the best documentation we could find. So that helped us out a lot.
So what would you guys like to see in future versions of React Native? Like, what have you been missing so far that has made it a bit harder, besides what you just talked about, too?
I'll say, I don't know, like documentation, but I mean, it's kind of fun because like I discovered like stuff that was already there, and the way it was, done from scratch, it was great. It was like ready to be used, but nobody told me about it until I dig into the code and starts like, hey, but they did, they did this from scratch. One example of that is like logging. For example, like we use Crashlytics for logging like crashes, and that works like perfect, like pretty well when you have like a native iOS app or Android app, because you can see the full stack.
Yeah, so personally for me, as Bruno and I have kind of been messing around with Android and obviously doing a lot with iOS, I think a lot of people in the React Native community kind of know this already, but Android is just a little bit behind iOS. I think as they reach kind of feature parity, and just with like the amount of contributions from the community and how excited everyone is, I think, like we were talking about a little earlier, the ability to write once and have a view rendered in 2 places, maybe even 3 places, and with web, iOS, and Android, I think that's a real serious possibility. And we've had people on our team who are native developers who started learning React Native so that they could see some of the magic as well. So I think it's super exciting, and it's heading in a really great direction.
I guess I agree with all that Jesse just said. Like the feature parity between iOS and Android used to be, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be the first pain point on the Proc Pain, list from React Native. It was like the most requested feature, and I think that's going to be a game changer. And that's like they are like releasing like a new version every 2 weeks. So I personally, I never seen something moving this fast. And I don't remember being so excited about like, tech that I was, playing with. I've been there when like PhoneGap and Cordova start. Then I try Ionic. I built a couple of apps. Then, I went to the like trying to do like some native stuff like with Objective-C. Swift was kind of very cool. But then I found out this, and I think it's like completely different and looks like more promising than all the rest.
Yeah, we had kind of a funny story at the company because when Bruno had started playing with React Native, I kind of started getting a little deeper into Swift, and he kind of extended this invitation to try it out with him. And I said to him, I don't know, I think I'm going to stick with Swift for a little while. And he said, dude, trust me, this is going to be huge. You need to jump on with me now. And I did, and very happy that I did.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the picks. Kevin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, on the previous episode, I picked GraphQL, and I've been playing with GraphQL for the past few months. This week, my pick is something I released called Serverless GraphQL. It's I guess, kind of a mashup or a joining of two technologies, GraphQL and Amazon's AWS Lambda service. So I have a project that will give you a GraphQL endpoint that runs against some DynamoDB tables that implement a blog. This is just a post table, a comments table, and a authors table. But you're able to query those through API Gateway via GraphQL. So I'll put a link in the show notes, but that's what I've been working on for the past few weeks. And it's now, it was a question I had. I was like, I wonder if I could put these two things together. And so now this is a kind of an infinitely scalable way to have a GraphQL endpoint that I'm hopefully going to be iterating over for the next few weeks and months. That's really it.
Very cool. Bruno, do you have any picks for us?
Yeah, sure. My pick is going to be GitHub repo. I'm not sure if you know, but there are all these, awesome lists in GitHub where just people contribute for like specific topics. So there is this awesome React Native repo. The address is github.com/john./awesome-react-native. And you can find a bunch of React Native related stuff from like tutorials to components to, any kind of library you imagine. Like it's a really great resource for if you are into React Native and people is kind of contributing a lot to it. So.
Okay, cool. Jesse, do you have any picks for us?
Yeah, I have a pick and a plug if I could. So my pick is this company Refinery29 just released an app called This AM. It's kind of a curated news app. It's all built in React Native, and the app is really cool, and they've done a couple of blog posts on Medium about some of the cool things that they had to do to take this thing from design to implementation. So that's my pick. And as a plug, we at delivery.com just started a Medium engineering blog with a couple of React Native posts. We have a few more to come. So
yeah, definitely check out those blog posts if you're interested in this subject. That's kind of why we had these guys on. They had put together some really well thought out blog posts, and it's almost like a documentation of what they went through doing some of this stuff. So it's really good stuff. Okay, Peter, do you have any for us?
Yeah, so this one's sort of on the fence because I'm probably going to use it with React first before I throw it into React Native, but it's the Clojure compiler plugin for Webpack. I've always wanted to give this a shot, but I've been too lazy to try to do it myself. And then I just stumbled over this. So it basically, if you haven't heard of the Clojure compiler, it's like it's a true compiler for JavaScript that Google wrote. And it has dead code elimination and a lot of other great like performance features. So definitely check it out.
Okay, great. My pick is going to be a new course on egghead.io by Kent C. Dodds. It's titled How to Contribute to an Open Source Project on GitHub. It's really cool regardless if you've already been doing this or not. It kind of gives you some extra information, a few things that I didn't know. And it's also a beautiful resource to like give to people, I guess, that are just looking to get involved in open source. It just came out. A couple of them are free. The rest of them, I believe, are paid. But either way, I would check it out. Okay, well, guys, thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
We enjoyed having you, definitely. Hopefully we'll have you again at another time. So that'll wrap up this episode. We'll see everyone next week.